The most dangerous thing in the world is not a total lack of knowledge. It is the absolute unshakable illusion of it. Consider this paradox. Why is it that the people who know the least about politics, science, or human behavior are always the loudest in the room, completely convinced they possess the ultimate truth? Meanwhile, the leading minds of our generation, those who spent decades researching the fundamental laws of existence, are often paralyzed by doubt, carefully calculating every word and consistently underestimating their own brilliance. This is not a mere flaw in personality. It is a fundamental glitch in human software, a psychological blind spot deeply embedded in your own brain right now. The thinner the slice of knowledge, the thicker the wall of certainty. Welcome to the shadows of the human mind, where ignorance masquerades as genius and wisdom is mistaken for weakness. Today, we peel back the layers of your own cognition to uncover a chilling truth. You are not as smart as you think you are, and your brain is actively working to keep you from finding out. 1. Defining the nature of the Dunning-Kruger Effect and the illusion of self-superiority. To understand why the human mind is so highly susceptible to its own arrogance, we must first dissect a structural phenomenon known in cognitive science as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. At its absolute core, this effect is a profound metacognitive deficit. It is a psychological state where an individual lacks the very capacity required to realize that they are performing poorly. In simpler terms, when someone is incompetent in a specific domain, they are inherently denied the exact cognitive tools needed to measure their own incompetence. This creates what psychologists call the illusion of superiority. The human ego possesses a built-in defense mechanism that rejects the terrifying reality of its own limitations. When we step into a new field, whether it is stock trading, creative writing, or high-level management, we do not see a vast empty void of things we have yet to learn. Instead, our brain takes the 2 or 3 random facts we happen to know, stitches them together, and constructs a fragile, artificial ceiling of absolute certainty. We look at this tiny ceiling and mistake it for the sky. The tragedy of this bias operates symmetrically across the spectrum of human capability, but it moves in opposite directions. While the low performer suffers from an inflated sense of self-worth, the high performer suffers from a quiet, pervasive distortion of reality. The true expert, having climbed the mountain of knowledge, mistakenly assumes that because a task is intuitive and clear to them, it must be equally intuitive and clear to everyone else. The amateur believes they are a rare genius among fools, while the genius believes they are merely ordinary among peers. This dual distortion skews our entire societal landscape, leading to a world where the unqualified eagerly seize the microphone, and the profoundly qualified step back from the podium. 2. Real-life victims of the phenomenon and the alarming statistics behind it. This is not a theoretical abstraction discussed only in university lecture halls. It is a living, breathing reality with measurable, sometimes fatal consequences. Let us examine the data collected by cognitive behavioral scientists across various sectors of modern society, exposing just how deeply this illusion is woven into our daily lives. Consider the simple act of operating a motor vehicle. Statistically, it is impossible for the vast majority of population to be above average in any skill. Yet when researchers survey elderly drivers, a significant demographic subgroup consistently rates their own driving abilities as far superior to the average citizen. The terrifying reality hidden within the data reveals that these exact individuals, who view themselves as masters of the road, carry a statistical risk of causing a fatal traffic accident that is 4 times higher than the average driver. Their subjective confidence operates in total isolation from their objective, declining reaction times. We see the exact same psychological architecture inside the heavily regulated world of firearm ownership in the United States. When gun owners were tested on their comprehension of basic critical firearm safety protocols, a fascinating and dangerous pattern emerged. The individuals who scored the lowest on the objective safety examinations were the exact same individuals who, prior to the test, boasted the highest self-assessment scores regarding their knowledge of weapon safety. Their belief in their own expertise prevented them from studying the very rules designed to keep them and their families alive. This cognitive blindness invades the sacred spaces of scientific research as well. In major laboratory studies, technicians were asked to evaluate their own technical performance and productivity. The data revealed a striking inversion. The lab personnel who ranked at the absolute bottom of objective performance metrics consistently believed they were performing at the highest tier of the organization. Because they lacked the technical depth to recognize what flawless laboratory work looked like, they interpreted their own sloppy, flawed processes as peak efficiency. The academic world offers no refuge from this effect either. When looking at undergraduate performance across thousands of universities, the students who finish their exams with the lowest grades are the ones who dramatically exaggerate their projected performance. After walking out of a test room, a student who failed completely will often confidently predict they earned a high grade. They do not know what the correct answers look like, so they assume their incorrect answers are brilliant. We see this play out on public stages, from local debate tournaments to national political campaigns. The speakers who score the lowest in logical reasoning and analytical articulation routinely walk off the stage believing they dominated the conversation. They confuse their loud volume with deep logic, and they mistake their lack of hesitation for structural truth. Even our most personal, intimate daily choices are governed by this bias. Individuals with the most toxic, destructive lifestyle habits, those who chronically deprive themselves of sleep, consume highly processed, destructive diets, and completely avoid physical exertion, consistently rate their personal lifestyle as significantly healthier than it actually is. They look through a warped lens, transforming deep physical neglect into a comfortable illusion of well-being. The pattern is absolute, unyielding, and universal. Across every measurable human endeavor, those who are genuinely struggling are the last ones to know. 3. The 4 stages of awareness and the fundamental difference between amateurs and experts. To map the exact geography of this mental distortion, cognitive psychology provides us with a profound cartography of the mind. The 4 stages of competence. This framework fractures human awareness into 4 distinct quadrants, balancing what we think we know against the brutal, unyielding reality of what we can actually execute. The first quadrant is the baseline of operational safety, conscious competence. This is the realm where you know exactly what you are capable of doing. You are a functional driver, a capable swimmer, or a competent coder. Every action requires deliberate mental energy, but you possess a highly accurate index of your own skill level. You do not overextend your boundaries because you can clearly see where your execution ends. The second quadrant is the beginning of intellectual maturity, conscious incompetence. This is the precise moment you look into a field, such as quantum mechanics, advanced macroeconomics, or the operations of a nuclear facility, and you declare with absolute honesty, "I do not understand this." This realization is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of psychological health. You have encountered a boundary of human knowledge and successfully cataloged it as uncharted territory in your own mind. The third quadrant is where the phenomenon of mastery becomes fascinating, unconscious competence. This is the realm of passive knowledge and deeply internalized instinct. When an individual spends decades practicing a complex craft, the neural pathways become so highly optimized that the execution bypasses the conscious analytical brain entirely. The expert performs flawless actions without thinking, and precisely because it feels as effortless as breathing, they lose the ability to measure how difficult that action appears to an outside observer. They have forgotten how much they actually know. This leads us to the fourth and most volatile quadrant of the human condition, unconscious incompetence. This is the domain of the pure amateur. It is the psychological state of not knowing what you do not know. When a person enters a new domain, they are inherently blind to the true scale of that domain. They lack the structural vocabulary, the historical context, and the technical depth required to even perceive the existence of their own ignorance. Let us dissect this dynamic through the analytical lens of a competitive sport like basketball. Imagine a casual viewer who watches professional games exclusively on a television screen. This individual sits on a couch, completely insulated from the physical realities of the court, and confidently criticizes the strategic decisions of elite athletes. To them, the game appears remarkably simple. You merely bounce a leather sphere and throw it into a metal hoop. Because they have never stepped onto the hardwood to face a professional defense, they are entirely unaware of the invisible variables governing every fraction of a second. They do not understand how a defensive rotation operates, how subtle shifts in a defender's center of gravity dictate a drive, or how microscopic changes in wrist flexion alter the trajectory of a ball under intense physical pressure. They possess a tiny fraction of superficial data and mistake it for deep tactical mastery. Now, observe the psychological transformation that occurs when this amateur attempts to become a serious player. As they begin to train, they are suddenly forced to confront the mechanical reality of the sport. They learn that the shooting arm must maintain a precise 90-degree angle. They discover that the force of the shot must be generated through the legs and transferred smoothly through a loose, snapping motion of the wrist. They are forced to master the synchronization of footwork during a crossover dribble while maintaining absolute situational awareness of the court. With every new layer of technical instruction they absorb, the horizon of their ignorance expands exponentially. The illusion of simplicity shatters into a million pieces. They are suddenly overwhelmed by the massive, terrifying volume of details they have yet to master. They experience a profound psychological deceleration. Their confidence collapses not because their skill has decreased, but because their capacity to see their own flaws has finally developed. This is the fundamental point of divergence between the amateur and the professional. The amateur learns a handful of basic concepts, experiences a sudden surge of neurochemical validation, and immediately declares themselves an expert. They look down at the world from a fragile peak of unearned certainty. The professional, however, has spent a lifetime converting complex, explicit data into unconscious procedural muscle memory. A master strategist, a world-class surgeon, or an elite grandmaster executes brilliant maneuvers instinctively. They do not boast about their ability to perform the basics because the basics have become an invisible part of their daily existence. Much like an adult does not boast about their capacity to tie their shoes or read a basic sentence. Instead of looking backward at what they have conquered, the professional's attention is permanently locked onto the boundary of their knowledge. They spend their days staring directly into the dark, unresolved complexities of their field. Because their focus is fixed entirely on what they have yet to solve, they operate in a state of perpetual, systematic self-doubt, assuming that if they are struggling with a concept, the rest of the world must be completely ahead of them. For an in-depth analysis of the Dunning-Kruger curve and the circle of knowledge model. To visualize this psychological phenomenon with mathematical precision, we must analyze the structural geometry of the Dunning-Kruger graph alongside the mental model of the expanding circle of knowledge. The classic Dunning-Kruger graph plots two intersecting variables, confidence on the vertical y-axis and competence on the horizontal x-axis. The trajectory of human learning on this graph does not follow a straight upward line. Instead, it traces a violent, unpredictable roller coaster of cognitive distortion. When a person's competence is at absolute zero, their confidence is naturally baseline. However, the moment they acquire a tiny superficial amount of data, their confidence curve shoots upward like a rocket, reaching a vertical maximum known as the peak of Mount Stupid. This is the geographic location of the aggressive amateur. They know just enough to formulate loud, unyielding opinions, but not enough to understand the structural flaws in their own logic. As competence continues to increase beyond this point, the curve suffers a catastrophic near vertical drop. As the individual learns more, they plunge directly into the valley of despair. Here, their confidence hits rock bottom because they can finally see the monumental mountain of knowledge they have yet to climb. Only after years of relentless systematic effort does the curve begin a slow, highly cautious ascent up the slope of enlightenment, eventually plateauing at the stage of true mastery, a state where confidence is high but permanently tempered by an acute awareness of complexity. To understand why this curve collapses into the valley of despair, we can utilize an elegant visual metaphor. Think of human knowledge as an expanding white circle set against a massive background of black ink, which represents the infinite unknown. The interior surface area of this circle represents the total volume of facts, experiences, and data you have successfully mastered. The dark, solid border surrounding the circle represents the perimeter of your awareness, the exact line where your knowledge ends and your conscious realization of ignorance begins. Let us compare the structural geometry of an amateur's circle against that of a world-class expert. The amateur possesses a very small circle. Because the surface area of their knowledge is tiny, the circumference of their border is incredibly short. They have a very small line of contact with the unknown. Looking out from their miniature island of knowledge, they see a world that appears remarkably simple, clear, and easy to solve. They experience almost no doubt because their perimeter of awareness is too small to capture the true complexity of reality. Now, observe what happens as that circle grows into the mind of a master. As you read books, analyze data, conduct experiments, and survive failures, the surface area of your knowledge expands. But notice the geometric inevitability. As the area of the circle increases, the circumference of its border must grow longer as well. The larger your store of knowledge becomes, the longer your line of contact with the infinite unknown. Every time you learn a new answer, you inadvertently expose to new questions that you never knew existed. An expert's circle is massive, which means their perimeter of doubt is profoundly vast. They are exposed to a crushing volume of unanswered variables, shifting data points, and systemic nuances. This geometric reality creates a profound psychological asymmetry. The professional's vast internal library of automated passive knowledge is technically larger than the amateur's entire mental universe. Yet, because the professional's eyes are locked entirely onto the massive black border of their ongoing uncertainty, they feel remarkably small. They are hyper-focused on the areas where their models fail to predict reality perfectly. Meanwhile, the amateur stands on their microscopic island, completely oblivious to the ocean of dark data surrounding them, misinterpreting their lack of internal doubt as proof of absolute intellectual superiority. 5. The psychological roots of attachment to beliefs, cognitive blind spots, and counterproductive defense mechanisms. To fully comprehend why this cognitive trap is so aggressively resilient, we must descend into the deepest evolutionary architecture of human psychology. The human brain did not evolve to seek absolute objective truth. It evolved to ensure survival, and in the brutal calculus of survival, ambiguity is synonymous with death. Our ancestors could not afford to sit in a state of prolonged philosophical contemplation when they heard a rustle in the tall grass. They needed an immediate, decisive interpretation. Was it a predator or the wind? As a direct result, the human mind developed a profound, hardwired intolerance for uncertainty. We suffer from a systemic psychological allergy to the unknown. To alleviate the deep existential anxiety of not knowing, our subconscious mind will rapidly latch an incoherent narrative available, transforming a fragile assumption into a rigid, unyielding belief, even when there is an absolute absence of empirical evidence. This is where the true danger of a cognitive bias reveals itself. A bias is not a superficial error in calculations that can be easily corrected with a calculator or a quick fact check. It is a structural lens through which all reality is actively filtered. If you tell someone that their calculations are wrong, you are challenging a single data point. But if you challenge a deeply held belief, your data is not processed as an intellectual gift. It is perceived by the ancient emotional centers of the brain as a direct existential threat to the ego. When an individual's core beliefs are confronted with contradictory facts, an optimization glitch occurs within the human software. Instead of updating their cognitive map to reflect reality, the individual experiences a phenomenon known in behavioral psychology as the backfire effect. The brain perceives the incoming data as an ideological attack. The neural pathways immediately shift into a hyper-defensive wartime posture. Rather than calmly analyzing the new evidence, the individual completely shuts down their analytical processing centers and doubles down on their original flawed position. They become aggressively stubborn, constructing elaborate rationalizations to discredit the source of the data and insulating themselves further inside their echo chamber. You can attempt to dismantle their delusion by bombarding them with mountains of verified statistics, bulletproof logical syllogisms, and flawless expert testimony. But you will quickly discover that your efforts are entirely futile. It is the psychological equivalent of throwing a rubber ball against a solid stone wall. The ball bounces back directly into your face while the wall remains completely unmoved, structural, and proud. The illusion of knowledge protects the individual from the terrifying realization that they are floating in an unpredictable universe without a compass. Therefore, the more insecure their subtextual ego feels, the more violently they will defend their unearned certainty. 6. A practical solution through self-reflection, the seed-planting strategy, and the practical value of intellectual humility. Recognizing the terrifying strength of this mental prison, we must accept a bitter, unyielding psychological truth. You cannot force another human being to change their mind if they possess absolutely no internal desire to do so. You cannot violently inject a new paradigm into the consciousness of an amateur who believes they are already a master. True intellectual transformation cannot be achieved through aggressive confrontation. It requires a strategic pivot toward a method known as the seed theory of communication. Instead of trying to smash down the walls of their certainty in a single afternoon, you must adopt the mindset of a long-term evolutionary gardener. When you present an alternate perspective to a dogmatic mind, you must not demand immediate surrender. Instead, you drop a singular, carefully framed question or a subtle, undeniable paradox into the conversation, and then you walk away. You guillaume hat zong. That intellectual seed may sit in the dark recesses of their subconscious mind, completely ignored for months or even years. It requires time to slowly erode the bedrock of their cognitive bias. The individual must encounter their own failures in the real world. They must watch their predictions collapse under the weight of reality. And only then, when the internal environment becomes fertile, will that seed begin to germinate. They will eventually look back at the idea, mistake it for their own spontaneous stroke of genius, and finally update their worldview. True, lasting influence is an exercise in profound, calculated patience. Ultimately, the ultimate weapon against the Dunning-Kruger effect must be turned inward, applied directly to the person staring back at you in the mirror. We must cultivate a rare, highly practical discipline known as epistemic humility, the systematic practice of intellectual modesty. In a modern digital landscape engineered by hyper-optimized algorithms, humility has been completely commoditized as a weakness. Social media platforms do not reward nuanced, calculated doubt. They reward loud, polarizing, and unearned certainty. The algorithms are completely blind to objective truth. They are designed exclusively to capture human attention, and nothing captures attention faster than an arrogant amateur shouting a simple lie with absolute conviction. We live in an information ecology that actively celebrates the peak of Mount Stupid, amplifying the voices of the loud and the dogmatic while burying the cautious, measured wisdom of the expert. But out here in the brutal, unforgiving reality of the physical world, nature does not tolerate our cognitive illusions. A bridge constructed by a hyper-confident but incompetent engineer will collapse. A portfolio managed by a lucky but ignorant trader will empty. Arrogance always extracts a devastating financial, emotional, and systemic price. Therefore, intellectual humility is not a soft, moral virtue passed down by ancient philosophers merely to make us polite. It is a ruthless, highly practical strategy for survival and elite growth. When you deliberately choose to shrink your own confidence, when you actively search for your own blind spots and habitually state the 3 most difficult words in the human language, I do not know, you are not weakening your position. You are unlocking the heavy iron gates of the ultimate learning mechanism. You are stepping off the fragile, crowded peak of unearned certainty and descending into the challenging, fertile valley where real skill is forged. By choosing to embrace the discomfort of your own ignorance today, you insulate yourself against the catastrophic failures of tomorrow. The next time you find yourself completely certain about a complex topic, or the next time you feel an intense urge to win an internet argument, pause. Ask yourself this chilling question. Am I standing on the peak of true mastery, or am I just shouting from the top of Mount Stupid? Your brain is hardwired to lie to you, to hide your own incompetence from your sight to keep you comfortable. Break the illusion. Force yourself to find one variable you do not understand about the topic and sit with that discomfort. Growth begins the exact moment absolute certainty ends. If you are ready to audit your own mind, leave a comment below with a time in your life when you were completely sure you were right, only to realize later you were completely wrong. Let us build a community that values the pursuit of truth over the comfort of being right. Subscribe to Shadow Psychology DD, and together, let us step out of the illusions of the mind and into the clarity of the shadows.